Jake Martinez stood in front of his small mirror and tried to fix his uniform for the 10th time that morning. His hands shook a little as he smoothed down the blue fabric of his communications officer jacket. Today was the day that would change everything for humanity. Today they would meet their first alien species face to face, the UES. Aurora had been traveling through space for 3 months when they received the signal. It came from a species that called themselves the Zelrani. The message was clear but formal. They wanted to meet with the humans to discuss possible friendship between their peoples. Captain Amy Foster had been preparing the crew ever since that first message arrived. Jake walked down the long hallways of the Aurora toward the main meeting room. Other crew members nodded at him as he passed. Everyone knew how important this day was. Dr. Ben Clark gave him a thumbs up from the medical bay doorway. Engineer Carlos Lopez called out good luck from behind a control panel he was fixing. Even the usually serious science officer Nina Bell smiled at him. The meeting room had been prepared with great care. 2 long tables faced each other with chairs on both sides. The human flag hung on one wall while space had been left on the opposite wall for whatever symbol the Zelrani might want to display. Bright lights filled the room so that both species could see each other clearly during their first meeting. Commander Lisa Hayes stood at the front of the room holding a datapad. She looked nervous but ready. She had spent weeks studying what little information they had about Zelrani culture. The aliens seemed to be a warrior species that valued honor and strength above most other things. They had technology that was different from human technology but appeared to be just as advanced. Jake took his place at the communications station near the side of the room. His job was to monitor all the translation equipment and make sure that both sides could understand each other clearly. The Zelrani had said they would bring their own translator, but the humans wanted to have backup systems ready just in case something went wrong. The minutes passed slowly as they waited. Jake checked his equipment 3 times to make sure everything was working perfectly. The universal translator that human scientists had built was the most advanced piece of technology on the ship. It could take spoken words in any language and convert them to English in real time. It could also take English words and convert them back to any other language it had learned. A soft chime sounded through the room, indicating that a ship was approaching the Aurora. Captain Foster entered the meeting room wearing her best dress uniform. Her gray hair was pulled back neatly, and her expression was calm but alert. She nodded to Commander Hayes and took her seat at the head of the human table. Jake watched through the small window as the Zelrani ship came into view. It was unlike anything humans had ever built. The ship seemed to be made of some kind of crystal material that caught and reflected light in beautiful patterns. It was smaller than the Aurora, but looked much more elegant. Strange symbols glowed along its sides in colors that shifted from blue to purple to green. The docking process took longer than expected because Zelrani ships connected to other vessels in a completely different way than human ships did. Finally, after 20 minutes of careful maneuvering, the 2 ships were joined together. Jake could hear the sound of the airlock systems engaging and equalizing pressure between the 2 vessels. Commander Hayes spoke quietly into her communication device to confirm that the atmosphere in the connecting tunnel was safe for both species to breathe. The Zelrani had already told them that they could survive in the same air that humans needed, but everyone wanted to be extra careful during this first meeting. Jake heard footsteps in the corridor outside the meeting room. They sounded different from human footsteps somehow. They were lighter, but seemed to have a strange rhythm to them. His heart started beating faster as he realized that, in just a few moments, he would see his first alien beings. The door to the meeting room opened, and Jake held his breath. The first Zelrani to enter was clearly their leader. He was tall and had skin that looked like it was made of blue crystal. Strange patterns of light moved under his skin surface, creating designs that constantly changed and flowed. His eyes were larger than human eyes and seemed to glow with their own inner light. Behind the leader came 3 other Zelrani. 2 of them looked like warriors based on the way they carried themselves and the strange devices attached to their belts that were probably weapons. But it was the 4th Zelrani that caught Jake's attention immediately. She was smaller than the others, and her crystal skin was a lighter shade of blue that sometimes shifted to pale green. The light patterns under her skin moved much faster than the patterns on the other Zelrani and seemed more delicate somehow. She carried what looked like a translation device in her hands and stayed close to the group but slightly behind the leader, Commander. Hayes stepped forward and spoke the greeting that had been planned for weeks. "Welcome aboard the UES Aurora. I am Commander Lisa Hayes, representing humanity and the United Earth Alliance. We are honored to meet you and hope this will be the beginning of a long friendship between our peoples." The Zelrani leader's skin patterns shifted to brighter colors as he listened to the translation of her words. When he spoke, his voice was deeper than any human voice and seemed to vibrate in the air. "I am War Prime Cathara of the Zelrani hegemony. We have come to determine if humans are worthy of our respect and possible alliance." Jake noticed that the young female Zelrani was the one operating the translation equipment. She listened carefully to everything that was said, and her fingers moved quickly over the controls of her device. Sometimes she would pause and seem to think about the best way to translate a particular word or phrase. The formal introductions continued as each member of both delegations was presented. When it came time for the Zelrani translator to be introduced, War Prime Cathara gestured toward her with what might have been impatience. "This is Lirevan. She will ensure that our words reach you without error." Jake watched as Lirevan stepped forward slightly and bowed in what was probably a formal Zelrani greeting. Her skin patterns pulsed with colors that seemed nervous or anxious to Jake, although he had no real way to know what Zelrani emotions looked like. She spoke for the first time, and her voice was much lighter than the War Prime's voice. "I am honored to serve as voice bridge between our peoples," she said through her translation device. "I will work to ensure perfect understanding between Zelrani and human thoughts." The meeting continued with discussions about trade and technology and mutual defense agreements. Jake monitored his equipment and watched the interactions between the two species. Everything seemed to be going well until Lirevan made a small mistake. She was translating a complex human phrase about diplomatic immunity when she stumbled slightly over the words. Jake could see that she was embarrassed by her error. Her skin patterns flickered and changed to colors that looked worried. She quickly corrected herself, but Jake noticed that she seemed upset by the mistake. Without really thinking about what he was doing, Jake leaned slightly toward her and spoke in a quiet voice that he hoped wouldn't interrupt the main conversation. "You're doing great. Your translation skills are impressive." The effect of his words was immediate and shocking. Lirevan froze completely, as if someone had turned off a switch inside her body. Her skin patterns flared to bright white light that was almost painful to look at. Then the colors began cycling rapidly through shades that Jake had never seen before on any Zelrani. Strange clicking sounds started coming from her throat. The other Zelrani in the room immediately stopped talking and turned to stare at her. War Prime Cathara's hand moved toward what was definitely a weapon at his belt. The entire atmosphere in the room changed from diplomatic politeness to something that felt very dangerous. Jake realized that somehow his simple compliment had caused a terrible problem, but he had no idea what he had done wrong or how to fix it. The clicking sounds from Lirevan grew louder and more rapid. Her skin patterns were now flashing so quickly that Jake could barely track the different colors. Bright white shifted to deep purple, then to orange, then to colors that didn't seem to have names. The light was so intense that several people in the room had to shield their eyes. War Prime Cathara barked something in the Zelrani language that sounded like an angry command. The two warrior Zelrani immediately moved to form a protective circle around Lirevan. Their own skin patterns had shifted to aggressive reds and purples that pulsed in rhythm with their breathing. One of them placed his hand on a weapon that looked like it could cut through metal. Commander Hayes stepped forward with her hands raised in what she hoped was a universal gesture of peace. "What's happening? What did we do wrong?" she asked in a voice that tried to stay calm, but Jake could hear the worry underneath. Captain Foster entered the room at that moment, having heard the commotion from the corridor. She took one look at the scene and immediately activated the ship's alert system. Red lights began flashing throughout the Aurora, and Jake knew that security teams would be rushing toward the meeting room within seconds. The elderly Zelrani, who had been introduced as Dexmore, pushed through the protective circle around Lyravan. His skin patterns were showing colors that seemed urgent but not aggressive. He spoke rapidly to War Prime Cathara in their own language. Jake's translation equipment picked up some of the words, but they didn't make much sense when converted to English. Dr. Ben Clark rushed into the room carrying his medical scanner. He had been waiting in the medical bay in case anyone got injured during the first contact meeting. "Is she hurt? What happened to her?" he asked as he tried to get close enough to scan Lyravan with his equipment. The warrior Zelrani blocked his path, and one of them made a sound that was clearly a warning. Dr. Clark stopped moving but kept his scanner pointed in Lyravan's direction. "Her biosigns are elevated but not dangerous," he reported to Captain Foster. "Heart rate is fast and brain activity is very high, but she doesn't appear to be in medical distress." Vexmore finally managed to get War Prime Cathara's attention long enough to explain something in their language. As he spoke, the War Primes' skin patterns shifted from angry red to what looked like surprise, and then to something that might have been disgust. When Vexmore finished speaking, War Prime Cathara turned to stare at Jake with eyes that seemed to glow brighter than before. "You," the War Prime said, pointing one long finger at Jake. His voice was so deep that Jake could feel it vibrating in his chest. "What words did you speak to Lyravan?" Jake felt every eye in the room focus on him. His mouth went dry, and he had to swallow twice before he could speak. "I just told her she was doing great. I said her translation skills were impressive. She seemed upset about making a small mistake, so I wanted to encourage her." Captain Foster looked confused. "That sounds perfectly reasonable to me. Jake was just being supportive." War Prime Cathara's skin patterns flared brighter. "Reasonable?" The word came out like he was spitting something bitter. "Your crew member has committed a grave violation of Zelrani cultural law." Vexmore stepped forward, and his translation device crackled as he spoke. "In Zelrani society, compliments about ability or skill can only be given by superiors to those below them or between bonded mates. For a stranger, especially from an unknown species, to compliment a young female's competence is either an insult or a declaration of romantic intent." The room fell completely silent except for the continued clicking sounds coming from Lyravan. Jake felt his face go red with embarrassment and horror. "I didn't mean it that way at all. I was just trying to be nice." "I had no idea that would be wrong." Commander Hayes looked at Captain Foster with an expression that said their first diplomatic mission was turning into a disaster. "Surely this is just a misunderstanding. We can explain that humans use compliments differently than Zelrani do." "It is not that simple," Vexmore said while glancing nervously at War Prime Cathara. "The damage has been done. Lyravan's reaction cannot be controlled or stopped. She is experiencing what you might call biological embarrassment, but far more intense than anything humans feel." Jake watched Lyravan with growing worry. She was still making the clicking sounds, and her skin patterns continued to flash rapidly. She seemed to be trying to speak, but every time she opened her mouth, only more clicking sounds came out. Her hands were shaking as she held onto her translation device. Dr. Clark managed to get a clearer reading with his scanner. "Her body temperature has increased by several degrees, and her breathing is rapid but steady. This looks like an extreme stress response, but she's not in immediate physical danger." War Prime Cathara spoke again, and his voice was colder than before. "In Zelrani culture, what your crew member has done is considered either a grave insult or an inappropriate advance toward a female who cannot defend herself. Either interpretation brings dishonor to our delegation and to Lyravan personally." Captain Foster stepped forward. "War Prime Cathara, I assure you that Ensign Martinez meant no disrespect or inappropriate behavior. In human culture offering, encouragement and compliments is considered polite and supportive behavior. We had no knowledge that Zelrani customs were different." "Ignorance does not remove the offense," War Prime Cathara replied. "Lyravan's biological reaction proves that damage has been done. Her body cannot lie about what it has experienced." Jake wanted to apologize, but he wasn't sure if speaking again would make things worse. He looked at Lyroven and felt terrible about causing her distress. The clicking sounds were starting to slow down, but her skin patterns were still cycling through colors much faster than normal. Dexmore was working with his translation device trying to find the right words in English. The clicking sounds are not distress calls as you might think. They are involuntary expressions that Zelrani make when experiencing powerful emotions. The skin pattern changes show that her body is processing feelings that are too strong for normal control. What kind of feelings? Dr. Clark asked while still monitoring his scanner readings. That is difficult to translate into human concepts, Dexmore admitted. Your languages do not have words for some Zelrani emotional states. War Prime Cathara made a sharp gesture with his hand. Enough discussion. The negotiations are suspended. We cannot continue diplomatic talks while this matter remains unresolved. Captain Foster looked desperate. Surely we can find a way to fix this misunderstanding. Humanity wants friendship with the Zelrani people. We don't want our first meeting to end in conflict over a simple mistake. It is not a simple mistake, War Prime Cathara said firmly. In Zelrani society, honor must be satisfied when it has been damaged. Your crew member has created a situation that cannot be ignored or forgotten. Commander Hayes tried a different approach. What would it take to resolve this situation? What do we need to do to restore honor and continue our discussions? Dexmore looked at War Prime Cathara for permission before speaking. There are traditional ways to handle such situations, but they have never been used with an alien species before. We do not know if humans could even participate in Zelrani customs. Jake finally found his voice again. I'll do whatever it takes to fix this. I never meant to cause problems or hurt anyone. Just tell me what I need to do. War Prime Cathara studied Jake for a long moment. His skin patterns shifted to colors that might have been consideration or evaluation. You would submit to Zelrani judgment for your actions? If it means fixing the damage I caused, then yes, Jake replied without hesitation. The clicking sounds from Lyraven suddenly stopped. Everyone in the room turned to look at her. Her skin patterns were still cycling rapidly, but they seemed to have shifted to different colors than before. She looked directly at Jake for the first time since his compliment had triggered her reaction. When she spoke, her voice was very quiet, and her translation device had to amplify her words for everyone to hear. He speaks truth with his voice patterns. His biological signs show no deception or malice. Perhaps there is a way to resolve this with honor intact. War Prime Cathara's expression was unreadable, but his skin patterns showed what might have been surprise. The possibility of a solution hung in the air like a fragile hope that could be destroyed by the wrong word or gesture. 2 hours passed before anyone spoke about a possible solution. The Zelrani delegation had returned to their ship while the human crew held emergency meetings in the Aurora's conference room. Captain Foster paced back and forth while Commander Hayes tried to contact Earth for guidance that would take days to arrive. Jake sat alone in his quarters staring at the wall. He kept replaying the moment when he had spoken to Lyraven over and over in his mind. The compliment had seemed so natural and harmless at the time. Now it might cost humanity their first chance at an alien alliance. Dr. Clark knocked on Jake's door and entered without waiting for permission. The captain wants to see you in conference room 2. The Zelrani have sent a message. Jake followed the doctor through the corridors of the ship. Other crew members looked at him with expressions he couldn't quite read. Some seemed sympathetic, while others appeared worried about what his mistake might cost all of them. Engineer Carlos Lopez nodded encouragingly as they passed, but didn't say anything. Conference room 2 was smaller than the main meeting room where first contact had taken place. Captain Foster sat at one end of an oval table with Commander Hayes beside her. Dexmore appeared on the main screen via video link from the Zelrani ship. His skin patterns were showing calm blue colors, but Jake could see tension in the way he held his shoulders. Ensign Martinez, Captain Foster said as Jake took a seat. Dexmore has explained that there may be a way to resolve this situation honorably. However, it will require your direct participation, and there are risks involved. Dexmore's image flickered slightly as he adjusted his communication equipment. War Prime Cathara has agreed to consider a formal resolution, but only if the human who caused the offense is willing to face Zelrani justice personally. What kind of justice? Commander Hayes asked. We need to understand exactly what Jake would be agreeing to. In Zelrani tradition, when someone's honor has been damaged, the one who caused the damage must prove their intentions were pure, Lexmore explained. This is usually done through combat or through a trial of understanding, Captain Foster leaned forward. Combat is obviously not an option. What does a trial of understanding involve? Lexmore's skin pattern shifted to colors that might have been uncertainty. The accused and the injured party must work together to solve a problem that requires both their skills. If they succeed, the offense is considered resolved and honor is restored to both parties. Jake felt a small spark of hope. That sounds reasonable. What kind of problem would we need to solve? That is where the situation becomes complicated, Lexmore admitted. Lyravan would need to agree to participate in the trial. In Zelrani society, the injured party has the right to refuse if they believe the trial would cause them further harm or embarrassment. Commander Hayes looked confused. Why would working with Jake cause her more harm? He's already apologized for his mistake. Lexmore was quiet for several seconds before answering. There are aspects of this situation that War Prime Cathara has not shared with you. The cultural violation is more complex than simple offense at inappropriate compliments. Captain Foster's expression became stern. Explain what you mean by more complex. I must speak with Lyravan directly first, Lexmore sighed. She alone can decide whether to reveal the full truth about her reaction to the human's words. Jake stood up from his chair. Can I talk to her? I want to apologize properly and ask her to help me fix this mess. If she's willing to participate in this trial, then I'm ready to do whatever it takes. Lexmore's skin patterns shifted to what looked like surprise. You would request direct contact with her? Even after what happened during the diplomatic meeting? Especially after what happened, Jake replied. I caused this problem and I should be the one to face the consequences. She deserves to hear a real apology from me. Captain Foster considered this for a moment. If Lyravan agrees to meet with Jake, then we support that decision. We need to resolve this situation before it becomes a permanent barrier between our species. An hour later, Jake found himself in Observation Deck 3 staring out at the stars while he waited. The room had been chosen because it was neutral territory with windows showing the vast empty space between the two ships. Lexmore would be present as a cultural advisor and translator if needed. When the door opened, Jake turned around expecting to see the elderly Zelrani advisor. Instead, Lyravan entered alone. Her skin patterns were much calmer than they had been during the diplomatic meeting, but Jake could still see rapid color changes moving beneath the crystal surface. You asked to speak with me directly, she said. Her voice was quiet but clear through her translation device. This is unusual, but I have agreed because your biological patterns during the meeting showed genuine confusion and regret. Jake took a deep breath. I want to apologize for what I said. I had no idea that compliments were inappropriate in your culture. I was just trying to be encouraging because you seemed upset about making a small translation error. Lyravan moved closer to the large window and stared out at the stars. Your apology is noted, but it reveals that you still do not understand what actually happened. Then please help me understand, Jake said. I want to learn so I can avoid making the same mistake again. Lyravan's skin patterns shifted to colors that Jake had never seen on any Zelrani before. They were softer somehow and seemed to pulse with emotion rather than cycling rapidly. What if I told you that your compliment was not offensive to me? Jake felt confused. But War Prime Cathara said it was a grave cultural violation. The whole diplomatic mission almost ended because of what I said. War Prime Cathara spoke truth about Zelrani cultural law, Lyravan replied. But he did not speak truth about my personal reaction to your words. I don't understand the difference. Lyravan turned away from the window to face Jake directly. In my entire life, no one has ever complimented my abilities. Not my family, not my teachers, not my colleagues, and certainly not my superiors. In Zelrani, Society, I hold the lowest possible rank. Jake listened carefully as she continued speaking. Her voice became stronger and more emotional as she explained her situation. I am a translator for a warrior species that considers communication skills to be shameful. My own family believes that my profession brings dishonor to our bloodline. Among my people, I am considered barely worth acknowledgement. That seems horrible, Jake said. Your translation skills are obviously excellent. You handled multiple complex concepts during the diplomatic meeting without any real problems. Lyravan's skin patterns flared brighter at his words. You see, you do it again without thinking. You notice my competence and speak it aloud as if it were natural and obvious. Because it is natural and obvious, Jake replied. Anyone could see that you're skilled at what you do. No, Lyravan said firmly, no one else sees it. That is why your compliment affected me so strongly. My biological reaction was not from offense or anger, it was from overwhelming joy. Jake stared at her in shock. Joy? But you seem distressed. The clicking sounds and the rapid color changes look like you were in pain. Those are the involuntary expressions that Zelrani make when experiencing emotions too powerful for normal control, Lyravan explained. I was not distressed. I was moved beyond my ability to respond normally. Then why is War Prime Cathara so angry about it? Lyravan's pattern shifted to what might have been sadness. Because my reaction revealed to everyone present that I had never received recognition for my abilities before. In Zelrani culture, that level of emotional response to a simple compliment suggests that I have been treated poorly by my own people. Jake began to understand the real problem. So the cultural violation isn't that I complimented you inappropriately. It's that my compliment exposed how your own society has been ignoring your talents. Exactly, Lyravan said. War Prime Cathara is embarrassed that aliens witnessed evidence of how Zelrani society treats those who do not fit traditional warrior roles. That's not your fault, Jake said. You shouldn't have to apologize for being good at something your people don't value. Lyravan's skin patterns became brighter and more complex. And that is exactly why your words affected me so deeply. You saw value in me that my own species refuses to acknowledge. The Vexmore finally entered the observation deck looking nervous. Lyravan, you have been speaking privately for too long. War Prime Cathara is becoming concerned about what you might be revealing to the humans. I am telling him the truth, Lyravan replied. Something that perhaps we should have done from the beginning. Vexmore's skin patterns showed alarm. The truth could make this situation much worse for both our species, or it could make it much better, Jake said. If we're going to be allies, then we need to understand each other honestly. Lyravan looked at both of them before speaking again. I will participate in the trial of understanding, but I want Jake to know that he will not be proving his innocence. He will be proving that recognition and encouragement can create understanding between species that traditional diplomacy cannot achieve. Jake felt a mixture of relief and determination. What kind of problem will we need to solve? Something that has challenged Zelrani minds for generations, Lyravan replied. Something that may require both human creativity and Zelrani analytical precision to resolve. The trial chamber was unlike anything Jake had seen before. Both ships had worked through the night to create a special room that connected the Aurora and the Zelrani vessel through an extended docking tube. Half of the chamber was built using human technology, while the other half used Zelrani crystal formations that seemed to pulse with their own inner light. War Prime Cathara stood at the center of the chamber wearing ceremonial armor that reflected the colors from the crystal walls. His skin patterns showed formal authority as he addressed both Jake and Lyravan, who stood on opposite sides of the room. Vexmore was present as an official witness along with Captain Foster and Commander Hayes representing humanity. The trial of understanding will test whether the human Jake Martinez truly comprehends the value of Zelrani capabilities, War Prime Cathara announced. If successful, this trial will restore honor to both participants and allow diplomatic relations to continue. Captain Foster stepped forward. What exactly will they need to accomplish? Vexmore activated a large display screen that showed star charts and communication logs from 3 different alien species. For 67 years, the Zelrani have been attempting to resolve a diplomatic crisis between the Korathi, the Venthic, and the Solani peoples. All 3 species have been at war over territorial disputes that our best analysts cannot understand. Jake studied the display and saw immediately that the problem was incredibly complex. Each species seemed to use completely different forms of communication, and their territorial claims overlapped in ways that made no logical sense. Multiple Zelrani diplomatic teams had tried to mediate the conflict, but all had failed. The challenge is that each species views territory ownership through fundamentally different concepts, Lyravan explained as she moved closer to the display. The Korathi claim space based on historical occupation. The Venthic claim territory based on resource needs. The Solani claim areas based on spiritual connections that other species cannot measure or verify. War Prime Cathara's expression was stern. Our greatest minds have studied this problem for decades. If a low-ranking translator and an alien communications officer can solve what our experts could not, then perhaps we have been wrong about the value of different types of thinking. Jake felt the weight of responsibility settling on his shoulders. This wasn't just about proving his good intentions anymore. Success could change how the Zelrani viewed both humans and their own people who didn't fit traditional warrior roles. Failure would confirm their existing beliefs, and probably end any chance for human-Zelrani cooperation. The work began immediately. Jake and Lyravan were given access to all the Zelrani diplomatic files along with recordings of failed negotiations and detailed cultural analyses of all 3 species involved in the conflict. The amount of information was overwhelming, and Jake wasn't sure where to begin. Lyravan seemed to have a system for organizing the data. She separated the communications into different categories based on the type of concepts each species was trying to express. "Look at this," she said, pointing to a series of Korathi messages. "They keep referring to their ancestors, but they're not talking about family relationships. They're talking about something else entirely." Jake studied the translated messages and began to see what she meant. The Korathi aren't just claiming historical ownership. They're saying their ancestors still exist in those territories somehow. It's not about past occupation, it's about ongoing spiritual presence. "Exactly," Lyravan replied. Her skin patterns showed excitement, and her translation device picked up nuances in her voice that suggested she was enjoying the intellectual challenge. But the Zelrani translators have been treating these as simple historical claims because our culture doesn't recognize spiritual concepts that cannot be measured. They worked for hours diving deeper into the cultural files. Jake discovered that human approaches to problem-solving were very different from Zelrani methods. Where the Zelrani focused on analyzing each piece of information separately, Jake found himself looking for patterns and connections that crossed between different types of data. "What if we're approaching this completely wrong?" Jake said during their 5th hour of work. "Everyone has been trying to find compromise positions between 3 competing claims. But what if the 3 species aren't actually competing for the same things?" Lyravan looked up from a Venthic resource analysis she had been studying. "Explain what you mean." Jake moved to the main display and began connecting different pieces of information with bright lines of light. The Korathi want spiritual territories where their ancestors exist. The Venthic want areas with specific resources they need for survival. The Solani want regions that have special meaning for their cultural practices. But all 3 species are claiming the same star systems, Lyravan pointed out. "Are they really?" Jake asked. He began overlaying the territorial maps from each species on top of each other. "Look at this. The Korathi claims are based on entire solar systems, but they only care about gas. Giant planets where they believe ancestor spirits gather, the Venthic. Want asteroid belts and dead planets with mining resources. The Solani need open space between stars for their meditation journeys." Lyravan's skin patterns began flashing rapidly as she understood what Jake was suggesting. They're not competing for the same territories at all. They're competing for different parts of the same regions and nobody realized it, because the translation process has been treating all territorial claims as identical concepts. Exactly, Jake said, feeling excitement building. A human diplomat would probably have noticed this pattern earlier because we're used to thinking about how different groups can share the same spaces for different purposes. But Zelrani culture is based on clear territorial control, so your translators assumed that's what all three species wanted too. They spent the next several hours working out the details of their theory. Lyravan's deep understanding of language and cultural concepts was essential for figuring out exactly what each species needed. Jake's human perspective helped identify creative solutions that didn't occur to Zelrani thinking patterns. Engineer Carlos Lopez and science officer Nina Bell were called in to help with the technical aspects of the proposed solution. Dr. Ben Clark provided analysis of how the different species might react to shared territorial arrangements. Even crew members who weren't directly involved in the project found ways to contribute ideas and suggestions. "This is remarkable," Captain Foster said as she reviewed their preliminary findings. "You've identified solution possibilities that 67 years of Zelrani diplomacy missed entirely." War Prime Cathara had been watching their progress with an expression that was difficult to read. His skin patterns showed what might have been surprise mixed with something that could have been respect. The approach is unprecedented, but the analysis appears sound. Lyravan presented their findings to the assembled group with confidence that Jake had never seen from her before. The key insight is that territorial conflicts often arise from translation errors rather than actual resource competition. Each species was assuming that the others wanted the same things they wanted because that's how the concepts were being translated. The solution requires creating new diplomatic frameworks that recognize multiple types of territorial relationships. Jake added, "Instead of trying to divide space between competing claims, we can create shared agreements that give each species what they actually need." Vexmore studied their proposal carefully. This would require all three species to accept concepts that don't exist in their current diplomatic languages. The Korathi would need to understand resource-based claims. The Venthak would need to recognize spiritual territories. The Solani would need to acknowledge ancestral presence concepts. "But that's exactly what good translation and diplomacy should accomplish," Lyravan said. "Not just converting words from one language to another, but helping different cultures understand new ways of thinking about problems." War Prime Cathara was quiet for a long time before speaking. "If this solution succeeds, it will represent the most significant diplomatic breakthrough in Zelrani history. It will also prove that our traditional approaches to complex problems have been insufficient." Jake looked at Lyravan and saw that her skin patterns were showing colors he was beginning to recognize as hope mixed with determination. "Are you ready to find out if our theory actually works?" "I've been ready my entire life," she replied. "This is what I always dreamed translation and diplomacy could accomplish." The real test would come when they presented their solution to representatives from all three species involved in the original conflict. If Jake and Lyravan were right, then 67 years of warfare could end within days. If they were wrong, then the trial of understanding would be considered a failure, and the diplomatic crisis between humans and Zelrani might become permanent. But as Jake watched Lyravan prepare for the most important presentation of her career, he realized that regardless of the outcome, something fundamental had already changed. She was no longer the nervous translator who had stumbled over words during first contact. She had become a confident diplomat who understood her own worth and abilities. The presentation to the three warring species took place 2 days later in a massive communication chamber that had been specially constructed for the historic meeting. Representatives from the Korathi, Venthik, and Solani peoples appeared on separate viewing screens while Jake and Lyravan stood together at the center of the room. War Prime Cathara and Captain Foster watched from the observation area along with diplomats and translators from multiple species. Jake felt nervous but confident as he looked at the alien faces on the screens. The Korathi representative was a tall being with flowing robes and eyes that seemed to contain swirling galaxies. The Venthic delegate appeared to be made of living metal with geometric patterns covering their surface. The Solani speaker looked almost human except for translucent skin that revealed complex internal structures beneath. Lyrovan began the presentation with perfect composure. Her skin patterns showed calm authority, and her voice carried the confidence of someone who finally understood her own capabilities. Honored representatives, we have discovered that your conflict may be based on fundamental misunderstandings about what each of your peoples actually needs from the disputed territories. The Korathi representative spoke first, and their voice sounded like wind moving through ancient trees. We have stated our position clearly for decades. Those star systems belong to our ancestors and cannot be surrendered to other species. With respect, Jake replied, we believe your ancestors and the territorial needs of the other species can coexist peacefully once everyone understands what each group truly requires. He activated the holographic display that showed their solution in three-dimensional detail. The disputed star systems appeared in the center of the room with different colored areas, highlighting the specific zones that each species actually needed. The Korathi claim entire solar systems, but your cultural data shows you only need the gas giant planets where ancestor spirits are believed to gather. The Korathi representative leaned forward with obvious interest. You have studied our spiritual beliefs? Lyrovan nodded. Your ancestors require the magnetic fields and atmospheric conditions found only on gas giants. The rocky planets, asteroid belts, and open space in those same systems are not spiritually significant to your people. The Venthic delegate made mechanical sounds that their translator converted to skeptical words. Even if the Korathi only need gas planets, we still require the asteroid resources in those systems. Our mining operations cannot function without those materials. Jake pointed to another section of the holographic display. The Venthic need asteroid belts and dead planets for resource extraction, but your industrial processes don't require gas giants or the open space between stars. Your operations can function perfectly while sharing the same solar systems with Korathi spiritual sites. The Solani representative spoke in tones that sounded like singing. What of our meditation routes? Our people must travel freely through those regions to maintain our cultural practices. Lyrovan smiled as she highlighted the final component of their solution. The Solani need clear passages through open space for your spiritual journeys, but your routes don't conflict with gas planet atmospheres or asteroid mining zones. All three of your peoples can use the same star systems for completely different purposes without interfering with each other. The room fell silent as the three representatives studied the holographic display. Jake could see them processing the implications of what had been presented. For the first time in 67 years, someone had shown them a way to get everything they needed without taking anything away from the other species. The Korathi representative was the first to speak. This solution would allow our ancestors to remain undisturbed in their sacred atmospheres while permitting other activities in regions that have no spiritual significance. The Venthic delegate's mechanical voice carried what might have been amazement. Our resource extraction could proceed at full capacity without any interference from gas planet activities or meditation flights. The Solani speaker's musical tones rose with excitement. Our people could follow the traditional routes between stars while the others pursue their own needs in areas we never visit. War Prime Kethara stepped forward from the observation area. His skin patterns showed colors that Jake had never seen before on any Zelrani. They seemed to pulse with genuine admiration and perhaps something like pride. The solution is elegant and practical. All three species can achieve their goals without compromise or sacrifice. Captain Foster joined the War Prime at the center of the chamber. If all parties agree to this framework, then we can begin drafting formal treaties immediately. The war that has lasted for decades could end within weeks. The Korathi representative was already consulting with advisors whose images appeared in smaller screens around the main display. We must present this proposal to our Council of Ancestors, but the initial response is very positive. The Venthek delegate began running rapid calculations on visible processing equipment. Economic. Projections show this arrangement would actually improve our resource efficiency compared to exclusive territorial control. The Solani speaker closed their eyes and seemed to be communing with unseen forces. The spiritual harmonies indicate this path leads to greater understanding between all peoples. As the three representatives signed off to consult with their respective governments, Jake felt a mixture of relief and amazement. The solution that had seemed impossible for generations had been achieved in just a few days of collaborative work. War Prime. Cathara approached Jake and Lyrevan with an expression that was completely different from his earlier stern authority. The trial of understanding is concluded successfully. Honor has been restored and diplomatic relations between humans and Zorani can proceed with full confidence. But then he did something unexpected. The War Prime turned to face Lyrevan directly and spoke words that Jake could tell were ceremonial and important. Lyrevan of the Zorani people, your contributions to this achievement go far beyond translation services. The High Council has voted to create a new position within our diplomatic corps. Lyrevan's skin patterns began cycling through colors that showed shock and disbelief. What kind of position? Cross-species communication coordinator, War Prime. Cathara announced. You will be responsible for developing new diplomatic methods that bridge cultural understanding between different peoples. The rank carries the same honor status as our military commanders. Jake watched as Lyrevan's entire posture changed. For the first time since he had met her, she stood with the confidence of someone who knew their value was recognized and appreciated. Her skin patterns showed colors that seemed to glow with inner light. Captain Foster smiled as she addressed both of them. The success of this mission has convinced Earth Command that human-Zelrani cooperation should be expanded immediately. Jake, you're being assigned as Lyrevan's permanent human partner for future diplomatic missions? Really? Jake asked, feeling excitement building. We get to work together on more first contact situations? The galaxy is full of species that haven't learned to communicate effectively, Lyrevan replied. Our success here proves that humans and Zelrani together can solve problems that neither species could handle alone. Over the following weeks, news of their breakthrough spread throughout the sector. Other alien civilizations that had been watching the human Zelrani negotiations began requesting similar diplomatic assistance. Jake and Lyrevan found themselves traveling from system to system, helping species resolve conflicts that had seemed impossible to solve. Each mission taught them more about the power of combining human intuition with Zelrani analytical skills. They developed new translation methods that went beyond converting words to actually helping different cultures understand new ways of thinking about problems. 3 months after their first meeting, Jake and Lyrevan were preparing for their most challenging assignment yet. A mysterious species called the Vorthak had made contact with galactic civilization for the first time, and their communication methods were unlike anything anyone had encountered before. As their ship prepared to jump to hyperspace toward the Vorthak homeworld, Lyrevan spoke to Jake, with colors in her skin patterns that he had learned meant deep gratitude and friendship. Jake Martinez, there is something I need to tell you before we begin this new mission. What is it? Jake asked while running final checks on their communication equipment. In Zelrani culture, we have a special term for someone who sees potential in others that they cannot see in themselves. Someone who speaks words that change lives and opens new possibilities. That person is called a soul speaker, and it is considered the highest form of being. Jake felt warmth spreading through his chest as he understood what she was telling him. And you think I'm a soul speaker? Lyrevan's patterns displayed colors that seemed to contain every shade of respect and appreciation that existed. You are the first human soul speaker my people have ever encountered. Your compliment did not just change my life. It changed how my entire species understands the power of recognition and encouragement. As their ship launched toward the unknown, Jake realized something that left him genuinely speechless for the second time since meeting Lyrevan.